Hello there. We have here a view of the end of my game of Army Group Centre, the opening blitz on Minsk, June 22nd to the 28th, 1941. So we have back here, this is the start line, the border between German-held and Russian-held Poland. There's Brest and the Brest-Litovsk fortress here. You have the River Niemen running down here, through most of the middle of the map, and there's a branch coming off here. Here you have Minsk, which is the main objective. Exactly this hex here, it has some outlying fortifications. There's also fortifications here because you have road and rail networks travelling off the map here, obviously in the line of the German advance. There's also down here, there's a town Mozyr and some, but it doesn't really come into play. There's a newer version of this game in Six Angles magazine, and it's the map slightly redesigned so that these pieces aren't here, and the map just continues straight on, so that there might actually be victory hexes down here. Which these aren't worth anything in this game, so really that's just cosmetic value. Now I'm just going to have a struggle with my stand a minute so it doesn't fall down. Okay. So the game started 14 game turns ago, 7 days ago. That's 2 turns a day. With the pincers, the German pincers are here, like the jaws of their attack were here and here. And so you have Russian defenders in here and then scattered throughout. There's fortified areas around here. And essentially there's a panzer group here and a panzer group here with two armies, the 4th and the 9th Army. It's more or less in the middle. The objective is Minsk, that's worth 30 victory points. But on the way, there's like Brest is worth 5, well, specifically the railway bridge over the river there. Vilnius again is worth 5, you've got a railway leading off there. There's another 5 here in Grodno, and then there's 3 scattered around basically on bridges across rivers and the occasional town like Białystok there. So the main objective is there. However, the Germans did not reach it. You can see they paused to regroup before they attacked because the Russians were bringing in reinforcements around Minsk, and that was looking to be a very strong defence. They also brought in a few reinforcements here near Slutsk towards the end to defend the... There's actually 28 victory points worth back there if the Germans could have reached it. Now that is a long stretch because the furthest they start is here and here. They have to fight their way all across the map to get to there with the 30 points in Minsk. What they managed was an operational victory. They took all these blue cubes are representing the victory point hexes they took. Plus, you can just see at the back there, all of these are dead or captured Russian arms and equipment, and they are worth victory points in themselves. And in fact, the total is such. Where did I write it down? Essentially, they got 99 victory points worth of captured and destroyed forces against 36 of captured objectives. So you can see if they'd captured Minsk, that would have doubled their the worth of all these objectives you see in blue there. So they got a comfortable operational victory, which is a step up from the minimal victory, which is called tactical. They did not get the strategic victory. However, if they'd captured the railway bridge over Baranowiczi here and Slutsk here, worth 5 and 10 respectively, if they had managed to take those, then they would have had the strategic victory. So I was quite happy with the German advance, although if I played it again, I would strike harder and faster because I was a little bit wary of taking losses, or just not as aggressive as I could have been. If I was, I would have. I reckon I've been able to take at least this one, and then have had a go at Minsk, or I don't know about here though. It's just a long way to get to. On the other hand, for the Russians for them to perform better, I would have sent more forces forward, because I kept reserve forces around Minsk, just defending Minsk, waiting for the Germans to get up. And then they had reinforcements come on. If I'd left the defence of Minsk to the reinforcements, brought the ones around Minsk further up, then the Germans could have been stopped and delayed further back here. They might never have, they wouldn't have got as far as they did. So it's a very interesting game. It's an interesting challenge for the German, although it's a kind of a steamroller, because that is the sum total of the German unit losses. There's a lot of units here that have taken 1 and the occasional 2 steps. That's 1 strength point. A standard infantry unit has 4 strength points. That's 4 steps. Or standard for the German is 6, but for the Russian is 4. But on the other hand, the Russians lost 20, 30, about 35 35 divisions, and you can see over here that these are their armies, and this army is completely destroyed, this army is completely destroyed, this one's tiny army, okay, this army is destroyed. So near enough the equivalent of 2 full strength German armies were completely destroyed. The rest had all managed to obtain stand defence. So that's another thing, that even though the Germans paused there, rather than they could have, like the last turn, they could have tried to punch in, but the Russians had enough time to put themselves on stand defence instead of like a more mobile situation, which makes the defence stronger. So again, showing that the Russians could have moved forwards more instead of just sitting there sort of waiting, and the Germans could have fought harder. So by way of what more can I say about this? Yeah, it's a good game. It's an old school game. This is an old Mark Simonich map. It's from 1993, I think, but it's really nice because it's not just your standard odds ratio and I go, you go. There's some interesting developments in the system. One thing that's very interesting is the combat system is differential, and the result is the best result you can get, even with the strongest forces, would be a 1 step loss to your enemy, and he retreats and is disrupted. And it's interesting because then you can, and you're using a D10, so there's quite a range of there's, within one's differential, there's quite a range of possibility. So you could have you don't get wide swings, but essentially the essence of it is that you might have evenly matched units and you get the same result as an extremely unbalanced match. Now that might sound unrealistic and so forth, but it works really well in this game in the sense that the Russians are retreating. They know that they're facing this massive onslaught, and they pretty soon get the idea that they're not up to it at the moment. Although they are, obviously there's going to be a stand there a week after the initial attack. So the point is that every combat, the best you can get is you whittle your defender down a bit and he moves back and he's disrupted. Now the other thing is that because of the modes, you can choose to have a prepared offensive or mobile offensive when you're on the offensive. There are other modes for defence, reserve movement, and when you're transporting, when you want to move quickly behind the lines. With a prepared offensive, you get a very good initial attack, but you don't move very far. And with a mobile offensive, you actually attack in the movement phase. So you can potentially, with the same units, attack in the combat phase, which comes before movement, and then do a mobile overrun type attack in the movement phase. If you're on prepared offensive, you can only attack in the combat phase and then move a short distance. So what that does means that you can get, the same unit could get 2 attacks against the same defender, and if they're surrounded as well, they're going to take more step losses for failure to retreat. So you can whittle groups down quite quickly, but you can see there's some diehards back here, and these ones are surrounded. And the Brest-Litovsk fortress only fell after about 5 or 6. About 10 turns, so about 5 days into the battle. So you can have like holdouts, and you have the Germans streaming round them, little pockets that they need to vaporise or that just hold them up. And this is what really the story is about, because you have quite difficult terrain. This is very marshy terrain. This is a lot more open, so the Germans could move quite fast here. They've got one panzer group moving fast here, the other panzer group's moving quite sluggishly here. There's really only 2 routes of advance, and obviously the Russians, there's a couple of rivers, there's a river here, then Brest here, so obviously the Russians are holding up, especially at the rivers. The Germans are trying to go around them, but because there's marshy terrain, some forest marsh combined, it's very slow. And I had this group of Germans here. They actually moved down here and then tried to make their way up, but there's only a railway track, not actually a road network there, and movement's actually slower on the railway track than the road. Some games have them, it's the same, but not in this. So these were not able to the idea was that they would join in the attack on Slutsk. But one thing I haven't mentioned, which is very key to the game, is the air forces. And I'll speak about that now, because the Germans have 3 flotte and the Russians have 6. Now 3 of them have been destroyed. None were of the Germans destroyed. They're a lot better quality, but these are crucial in the historical scenario. These all start at reduced strength. In the Pavlov's decision scenario, which is kind of the medium scenario rather than the Stalin's fancy one, I played this Pavlov's decision one, they all start full strength. So that means they need 2 hits before they are destroyed. And the point is that these are really what hold up the Germans, more even than the terrain, difficult terrain that they're working in. And don't forget to mention these thick forests here and here. You really have to work around them. It's just too slow to move through. And you can see back here there's a massive log jam of German forces. These are all infantry, so they're slow moving. These are the 4th and the 9th Army. Really, they were necessary to mop up and capture the forces in the pocket. Panzer armies, I'm not sure about the historical campaign, maybe they came round like this and this. I just sent them forward this way and this way, and they've taken a lot with them. It's quite interesting that, because as a German you can decide, okay, I'll just form the pincer and then mop up what I've captured. You might capture all of that and get enough points for victory with the few objectives on the way. Or do you kind of leave those armies, don't close the pocket so that they can retreat backwards, which quite a few had done, and head for Minsk and over here. I chose the latter. That might have been a bit of a mistake for a best result. But anyway, back to the air forces. So the point is that you might be able to see there's a little 3 in white there, and then a 5. That's 3 and 4. That's 1 and 1. That's actually that's a fighter. It's not a Straf bomber or bomber. So really, you want that one would have been fighting. Dog fighting and so forth, and what's left after that, they're then able to have a pot shot at the bombers and Straffers. But the point is that these fellows with 3, what you do is you put one of these fellows down on a hex, say there, and then any movement within 3 hexes, if you roll on the d10 under 4, and note that a 0 on the d10 or 10 is a 0, so that's 50% chance that any unit in there is disrupted and it has to stop. And so you can see that a whole army like this can be stopped by one flight of interdiction and strafing bombing runs. So in the ahistorical scenarios, these are at full strength. In the historical scenario, they would all been at reduced strength, which meant that that would have been range 3, but only 2, so only sort of 30% chance. And it would also, at strength of 1, only needs to get hit once by some of these fellows, and it's out of the game. So the Russians lost 3 full strength. You can imagine 6 not full strength, they would have lost all of them. So nothing to hold up. And it's really interesting in that is the case, because the only difference between the Pavlov's decision and the historical scenario is that he has his full strength air flights, and that is what holds up, and it makes. And then you have different victory conditions. You have to get more and do more as the German. So and again for the Stalin's fantasy, I think they get a few more reinforcements, and they get a couple more flights, full strength flights, and they make a huge difference. And another thing they do is they can add the bombardment number, which is the last number, which you can see is quite high on the Germans. They can add that to any check. So if you have them, like you have Stuka units there, so they only have a range of 1, so that these ones like 3. So the Stukas are not good at interdicting, but you have 3 flights there. You plot them on a Russian unit, and when you attack it, they have to add 5 to their kind of saving roll they get, which is on a D10. Obviously, that's half the range, which means they're more likely to get disrupted and take a step loss. So you got some really effective forces. The Air Force makes a huge difference, as I believe it did in this Blitzkrieg, particularly at this point in the Blitzkrieg campaign. And so if you give the Russians a stronger Air Force, it makes a really big difference to the German onslaught. So that's very interesting. And what more can I say about the game? Yes, like there's those 3 scenarios, and I'd say it's of note that none of them, they all have the same setup apart from the additional forces and the historical 2. So there's no free setup. Now so there's potentially a 4th scenario in which both sides you have your own setup. That would be a very interesting game, because you can imagine how you've got the start line as I think I would set up these the armies differently, because, and for example, I probably wouldn't have a panzer group here. I've had both the panzer groups here, because the panzer group down here is just too slow through the Pripyat marshes here. I'd have them further up, so they could, maybe 2 of them could swoop around like this, and the infantry armies moving up on the bottom part there. Similarly, the Russians, you could take folks out of the pocket, but you'd still want to have some defence in depth, because you still want to defend Minsk and the railway routes off map up here. So there's a very interesting potential 4th scenario there, which I think, who cares how balanced it is? I think it would be balanced in the fact that you're still working with all the same forces and so forth, but each having being able to modify how you set up. So since this is somewhat of a bit of a review, I spoke about this before in my intro, but the rules are fine. They're very good. There's just 1 or 2 things that needed clarification, nothing I couldn't think through myself. I haven't found any errata yet online. I don't believe there is any. One thing I would change if I was doing it today is I'd just make the airplanes clearer, because you put these down on a hex, and you have to you have to also always be checking what's the radius around an airplane, am I moving in it, and it's easy to lose them amongst the other, exactly the same colours as the more or less as the army units. So I'd make those a different colour. If if I was that bothered, I would doctor them myself. But they're sort of very nice. They're I think they're Beth Queenman counters. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. It's a very interesting situation because as an operational game you've got a very interesting terrain to go through, and allied with that is the different modes. That's that and the combat style really sort of make this game, plus the strong effect of the air. You do have weather which comes in. If the weather's bad, then that's not good for the air, obviously. And the modes, I haven't spoken about them, but essentially what you have is for every army has core headquarters, and the core headquarter and the core, they have between 1 and sort of 4 or 5 divisions each, depending on. They can decide what mode to be in, but once you're in a mode, they have to roll if you're changing to a different mode. So, for example, it's easier from SD as stand defense. So if you're making a stand, it's easier to change into withdrawal mode. Excuse me. reserve mode than it is to move to the transportation mode or into an attack mode. So you have the modification like that, and then the first number you see on these is essentially your saving roll against if there's a hit result against you. And so the higher it is, the more chance you have of making it. And the combat results table just lists a modifier to that saving roll, or C, it just means it's checked, and it's dependent on terrain. With modifiers, that armour makes a huge difference because they have an armour superiority modifier. Rivers make a big difference because you have your basic thing but not your armour superiority. And you can add in, if you're on prepared objective, you can add in headquarters support. And you can see that's how the Germans were. So they were all on mobile offensive by the end, except a few still on prepared offensive, actually desperately trying to get into mobile offensive. Although I needed, once you're in mobile offensive, you have to roll a 7 or less to get into prepared. So it's pretty easy to do. But once you're in prepared, to get into mobile, it's a 6 or less. So it's not a done thing. Sometimes you don't get what you want, and so you're staying a whole half a day longer organising. You can still move and so forth, but you don't jump into action as quick as you wanted. So that really makes the game. Plus, it's also interesting, the terrain effects chart. It's not just your sort of standard. It seems that there's a fair bit of thought gone into it. So, for example, clear and woods, foot take 3 movement points, and the movement rate depends on your mode. Motorised only 1 and 2, which is very interesting. Swamp, so but then, for example, forest, that's the same to move through. Paleshi, that's the swamp stroke woods combined, it's the same. Then you come to road, it's quite slow for infantry, as you would expect. And then here for the railway, it's not that fast, but they're only really of benefit through this heavy terrain here. So yeah, it's good. It feels nice, like there's a lot of thought gone into this, and something a little bit different and exciting decisions to make because of that. How long do you stay in? Do you stay in mobile mode and try to make an attack, which gives you more chance of taking a hit yourself, or do you stop, get prepared mode, bring up your headquarters artillery? And that's probably perhaps what I was doing too much of as a German. To get to Minsk, you're going to have to push your units, but then you're taking losses, and that would be subtracted from the German victory points. So there we go, Army Group Centre. Out of print, unfortunately, in the original 3W version and the Japanese 6 angles version, but if you can get a copy and you have a good long day or a bit to play, I would recommend it. It's 14 turns long, and although I was like clipping counters and so forth as I went along, it was taking me an hour, maybe sometimes an hour and a half for a turn. The Russian turns tend to be quite quick because they're not fighting. It's only when you're fighting that it really takes time, because you have to roll dice, look up the results, swap out step losses and so forth. So it depends how much fighting. Some turns there's not much and they zip past in half an hour. There we go.